the depths of Hades and evil arises to corrupt the living. It brings pain and death to all that it touches. It murdered your family, destroyed your village. Now you must enter into its lair on a dark mission of vengeance. Good luck.
The year is 1996, and as personal computers had started to become more and more common in households, it would mark the rise of PC gaming. The 16-bit console wars were becoming a thing of the past, now living in the shadow of the new generation as the newcomer PlayStation entered the battlefield. Doom had inspired a horde of similar first-person shooters, while real-time strategy games such as Blizzard's Warcraft or Westwood's Command & Conquer allowed players to command armies with the click of a button. And over on the console side, the previously covered Resident Evil had coined an entire genre. Combining this with many series making their transition from the world of 2D to 3D, it was certainly an exciting time for the industry as new genres and subgenres were being created and adopted. One of these genres would be named the Action RPG, or ARPG for short, which many claim today was created by none other than Diablo by Blizzard Entertainment.
Hello, my friend. Stay a while and listen.
The dark fantasy's descent into randomized dungeons filled with endless loot captivated millions in the trance of just one more run. So, stay a while and listen to why Diablo, released in 1996, was great. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this video, AG1. Being a fan of MMOs, naturally, my life is a wreck, and so is my routine and diet. To balance out a lifetime diet of red meat and high fructose corn syrup, I supplement myself with AG1, which is a 1-scoop daily health drink that's clinically shown to support gut health and help fill in common nutrient gaps. It has over 75 ingredients such as superfoods, B vitamins, probiotic strains, antioxidants, and functional mushrooms. So it basically replaces juggling a multivitamin, probiotics, and a bunch of other stuff. I just mix it with water first thing after rolling out of my box springless mattress, and it fits right into my imperfect life. For me, it's helped provide some steady nutritional support. I feel like I have more consistent energy, so I can make more videos complaining about World of Warcraft. It's not magic, but it does bring some balance and foundational nutrition in a nice and convenient way. If you're curious and you want to try it, through my link you can get 3 free AG1 travel packs, as well as 3 free AGZ travel packs, plus some free vitamin D3 and K2, as well as an AG1 welcome kit with your first AG1 subscription order. Head on over to drinkag1.com/MadSeasonShow to grab that deal and kickstart your routine. Although Diablo is often credited as the true origins of the genre, truthfully, the foundation for which it was built off can be traced all the way back to 1980. While it was officially classified as an action RPG due to its real-time combat, from a design standpoint, it wasn't all too dissimilar from a roguelike. In a traditional RPG, the experience of 2 different players will be relatively the same. They encounter the same characters with the same stories. They go through the same dungeons that hold the same treasure chests with the same treasure inside of them, and at the end they fight the same boss, and they do the same thing over and over until they reach the same credit screen. The draw is to dive into this predetermined story and being taken across this world on the developers' say, and see the characters grow and change in often a very rigid way, and respectfully touting hundreds of hours of gameplay. However, with an action RPG like Diablo, they would promise infinity, as its longevity lied in its replayability. While there certainly was a story to be had, one of the main draws is that, due to its randomized nature, the game could be played millions of times, and the gameplay experience could be totally different. Different people will choose different characters, allocate their stats differently, get different dungeon layouts, different enemies, with different affixes, and different loot, which leads to different builds, creating this unimaginable amount of variations in its gameplay. And while Diablo is known for birthing this genre of game that relies heavily on replayability, its true origins, the roguelike, unsurprisingly, was in 1980 with a game called Rogue. Yeah, it was the Dark Ages. It's essentially the electronic version of playing with your alphabet soup. I'm sure a lot of you probably weren't even born when this came out. This, amusingly enough, were its graphics. You were the mighty @ symbol, trudging through dungeons, fighting deadly foes such as the dastardly letter K, which represents a kestrel. Yeah, people had a lot of imagination in 1980, but what separated this from a traditional RPG was that its draw was replayability by way of a unique experience each and every run. Similar to Diablo, each run would have different layouts, enemies, loot, traps, and it demanded that the player to adapt on the fly in order to succeed. There wasn't this one strategy fits all, which created a unique experience with each attempt, and it became quite popular. Well, as popular as it could be in stuffy college and high school computer labs growing across the globe. And just like with any innovation after its release, many games like Rogue would follow in its footsteps, thus creating the genre roguelike. They all had various tweaks in their world and story and gameplay, but at the end of the day, the goal was to reach the end while creating unique builds along the way and battling random enemies in this turn-based style of combat. If you were to fail, you would try again from the start, and if you were successful, you would try again from the start. The genre relied heavily on the slot machine effect of this addiction where every turn or every kill has this potential to yield big rewards. Some game-altering bow or staff that amplifies character power many times over, to where suddenly rooms that took 10 minutes to clear now take 30 seconds. In this way, although it feels a little bit silly to say since there are no real graphics nor even sound effects, the game was far more action-oriented than its contemporaries at the time, which were far more story-oriented and slower-paced. One of these many clones would be Angband 10 years later in 1990, and Angband was important because one particularly important individual would become quite addicted to it.
I'm a cowboy on a steel horse.
David Brevik. As simple as these games were, they were also quite well known for their intense difficulty, and David would become so obsessed with it that he would use it as an inspiration for the series that we know today, Diablo, named after the mountain that he grew up near in San Francisco, California. The idea was simple yet daunting. The game was to take the idea of Angband and bring it out of the Stone Age. Instead of an @ symbol, you were a rogue or warrior or sorcerer. Instead of various characters and symbols, you had actual graphics, grass, trees, buildings, caves, dungeons, and even voice acting.
The witch, Adria, is an anomaly here in Tristram.
Instead of reading through giant blocks of text in order to be immersed into the world that's ultimately comprised of punctuation, the game would now deliver it naturally through its gameplay and atmosphere. Instead of plain text telling you how much damage a spell dealt, you now saw your character explode an enemy, or get exploded in gory detail, and items, weapons, and armor now had graphics, and each swing had this hefty audio feedback, while the wind would howl and gust around you, with music playing in the background to set the atmosphere. But the question remained, how is it possible to go from this to this? To turn what was at that point words on paper into a game that would define a genre?
We've gone around to 25 different publishers, and they have said, no, RPGs are dead.
The more material beginnings of the game would begin in 1993, when Brevik, along with two friends, Max and Eric Schaefer, founded the video game development company, Condor. Having a diverse history of experience under their belts, it was then that they would transition Diablo from an idea in their heads to words on paper, and began pitching it to various publishers in order to get the proper funding to make it into a reality. However, this proved to be difficult as the RPG genre had hit something of a slump during this time. They had been selling quite poorly across all platforms, and even though today it's largely remembered for its action portion of the ARPG, simply by having those last 3 letters introduced a tremendous hurdle. And so, ironically enough, this game that would spawn a legendary franchise was denied by publisher after publisher, and the team began to realize that it wouldn't be businessmen who would provide the funding it needed. It would have to be people who truly understood what made games great.
Las Vegas is often thought of as the wedding capital of the country. Want to get married quickly? Come to Las Vegas. Well, this week, some of the most important couplings in the computer industry will take place here. Not at one of these little wedding chapels, but over at the convention center at the Consumer Electronics Show.
Things took a brighter turn at the 1994 Consumer Electronics Show, where Condor had been demoing a new fighting game, the Justice League Task Force for the Sega Genesis. At this point, Street Fighter II had hit arcades and store shelves, which marked a new era for the fighting game community. Of course, with its overwhelming success came many clones, including this Justice League knockoff. And surprisingly, another developer named Silicon and Synapse was demoing the Super Nintendo version. This came as a surprise to both teams, as the two never knew the other version existed. Yet still, somehow, the two versions ended up being remarkably similar in both visual design and its gameplay. This would create a spark, as the developers clearly had similar design philosophies in mind, and so Condor pitched Diablo to Silicon and Synapse and asked if they had any interest on working on it together and having their publisher, which was Davidson and Associates, to provide the funding. Silicon was intrigued, but they just had their hands full at the time, and they told Condor that they would talk again after they were finished with an interesting idea that they were working on called Warcraft. True to their word, and now going under the name Blizzard Entertainment to avoid confusion with breast implants, after Warcraft's release, they let Condor formally pitch Diablo to them, and even though the RPG genre had been stagnant, they saw the uniqueness and potential of Diablo, which ultimately resulted in them acquiring Condor and renaming them to Blizzard North, and tasked them with making Diablo a reality. Needless to say, this acquisition would be a critical moment for the game's development. However, not having experience with business and negotiating, they ended up settling on a $300,000 budget for Diablo, which was woefully inadequate to pay a development team of around 15 people at this point. However, fortunately, they had also been doing some work for 3DO on their upcoming console, the M2. At this point, having had a proven background in sports games, most notably with a popular arcade basketball game, NBA Jam, they ended up signing a $1 million contract to make a similar arcade backyard football-based game called NFL PA Superstars. 3DO had ended up being so impressed with their work that when Blizzard approached Condor to acquire them, it would create a bidding war. 3DO would end up bidding nearly double what Blizzard was offering, but still, the team decided to go with the latter as they felt that they really understood their vision and they would give them more freedom to make Diablo the best version that it could be. The format of the game is what really sold Blizzard. Instead of this Tolkien-esque inspired fantasy world with elves and dragons, players would be plunged into the gothic horror-inspired world of Sanctuary, where the players take control of a hero in their attempts to save the town of Tristram from Diablo. The world's become a battlefield in a war between heaven and hell, and it's infested with demonic entities, and it's up to you to delve into the dungeons and crypts and destroy the Lord of Terror himself. And while there certainly was story to be found, the focus of the game was centered much more on what made these roguelike games popular, and that's the loot. The previously mentioned dopamine slot machine effect of getting this uber drop and going on a monster slaying rampage. There wasn't a long and intricate story and campaign to work through, nor any deep, hyper-complex character customization that were standard to the RPG. Instead, owing to its subgenre, they had focused much more on action and gameplay, and much like the roguelike, replayability. And at its core, this would be what would set it apart from the then stagnant RPG genre. Specifically, character creation at this point in the RPG had hit this all-time level of complexity. Being inspired from tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons, It often involved research of different races, classes, subclasses, archetypes, stat point allocations, character backgrounds, and it commanded a lot of energy before players could even begin their journey. Once again, owing to its action side, one of Diablo's core philosophies was that, especially since it was so focused on replayability, was to be able to hit a few buttons and then let the player loose into the world so that they could get the feeling of slashing demons and getting loot as quickly as possible. Something that can feel quite jarring today, but certainly achieved its goal of this quick turnaround of being able to start runs without any hassle. Graphically, the game had been inspired by the legendary XCOM series, where the viewpoint was this isometric look over the game world. In fact, the world was designed initially from direct screen grabs of the individual tile structure of XCOM, where the world is essentially this grid that the player can move around in. Old School RuneScape is another game that has a similar system, although with a movable camera, of course. Something they didn't copy from XCOM, however, would be its vibrancy. The world of Sanctuary, understandably so as it was infested with demons, was quite dark and unwelcoming. The goal was to make the player actually feel as if they were crawling through a dungeon or a crypt with danger lurking around every corner. And so the whole aesthetic of the game would be about as depressing as my voice, which would be complemented quite nicely with its sound design. The music would range from these low-pitch hums to this atmospheric howling to create the sense of despair and danger that the entire world would be centered around.
The big controversy. Real-time versus turn-based.
But as action-oriented as it ended up being, it became quite close to becoming an entirely different game. Anyone who's ever played the original Final Fantasies knows that a staple of RPGs early on was its turn-based combat, whether that be characters and enemies having a speed stat that reduced time between attacks, or a predetermined order of turns, or turns being split up into sub-turns with certain action points to use per turn, or any variation really. Generally, one thing was true. You wait for your turn to play. It's kind of like in an anime where characters attack and then talk, and then it's the other guy's turn to attack, and then they talk. People say it's kind of silly, but I guess they just never played old school RPGs. This was something that, again, was inspired from tabletop RPGs, as it was really the only way to do combat, and something that just stuck with the genre, even when it reached mediums that very much allowed for real-time combat. And at this point in the game's development, it just seemed to be a given that it was to have turn-based combat, just like every other RPG. The player would walk up to an enemy, they would perform a few actions such as attack, heal, use an item, and then the enemy would get their turn and do their attacks until one of them fell over. This is how Rogue and its many clones worked, and even though technology evolved, it just didn't immediately occur to developers that they weren't rolling dice and writing on little pieces of paper anymore. The impetus for this change ended up being another series that Blizzard had seen success with, the previously mentioned Warcraft.
Welcome to the world of Warcraft.
Warcraft is an RTS, real-time strategy, a genre of game which very name is in defiance of this traditional turn-based structure that had similarly dominated strategy games at that point. Players would construct buildings, train troops, mine gold, and slaughter enemies all in real time, where, with the exclusion of the pause button, if they were to walk away from their computer, they would eventually be overrun. The strategy genre faced similar doubts before its breakthrough, but this fast-paced, on-demand action would quickly become its most defining trait, and since Blizzard had seen such success in their Warcraft series, they put the same pressure on Blizzard North to make Diablo the one to break the same barrier for the RPG genre. And seeing as how the game had already done away with the more traditional features of the genre, some members of the team began to think, why not also this turn-based combat? The game was already setting up to be very action-oriented, so wouldn't a real-time system be more appropriate? This would become a huge point of debate within the team, with Brevik himself adamantly insisting on turn-based, and that the very success of the game depended upon it.
Blizzard South, they approached us and said, well, we'd really like to make this a real-time game. And I said, what are you guys talking about? Real-time? What? No. This is one of your strategy games.
He argued that the core of the RPG, all the way back to D&D, was that you would have these situations where it's really dangerous and your character's on the verge of death, and each and every decision you make can be the difference between life and death. His point against real-time was that this core fundamental appeal of the RPG would be lost, and the game would become mindless as players would just spam attacks or chug potions in desperation. The development team, which was around 15 people large at this point, gathered for a vote, and for various reasons, certainly the success of Warcraft being one of them, real-time combat ended up being the favored option, with only a few holdouts wanting turn-based. The biggest opponent of real-time, David, ended up being the one to implement the system, and as soon as it was finished, he had this to say.
So I remember taking the mouse, and the warrior walked over and smacked the skeleton down, and I was like, oh my God! That was awesome!
This moment would become the birth of the action RPG. Another feature that Blizzard would have their way with was multiplayer. At the time, they were working on a live service feature to support all of their games, a community hub of sorts where players could make accounts, add friends, and chat with and play with each other in a variety of Blizzard products, eventually forming the name Battle.net. And since Diablo was being developed at the same time, it became a highly important feature that the team hadn't even considered at this point. By the mid-90s, computers and dial-up connections had started to become standard in households.
I like this. With one click, I can browse all kinds of great features on America Online.
But even today, if you think about the traditional RPG, you rarely find that they have any kind of multiplayer. But of course, as we've learned, Diablo is far from traditional, and mid-development, the decision was made to make it into a multiplayer experience, which was just another unexplored frontier that they had set upon. Although it certainly added more hours and held its own hurdles, bashing skeletons and exploding demons is great, but what about teaming up with friends and creating unique builds that synergize in a multiplayer setting? Again, as the game lacked this conventional long campaign of the RPG genre, the only way to obtain longevity was through replayability. This was done in a few different ways, some that were in the player's control, while others weren't. In their control, you had a choice of 3 classes, the basic bread and butter of any RPG. You had the warrior, rogue, and sorcerer, their base gameplay being what you would expect. Warriors start off with higher stats appropriate for melee combat, as well as the highest armor class. Rogues were more dexterity-oriented, specializing in bows and using lighter armor, and sorcerers were the weakest melee fighters, but the most capable in spellcasting. Each of these classes offered unique playstyles, but at the same time they weren't restricted like in a typical RPG where perhaps a sorcerer couldn't wield melee weapons. Although they did specialize in their conventional roles, it was also important for the developers to give the player the power to be a warrior who could cast spells, or a sorcerer who is also capable in melee when it was needed. This is often referred to as multi-classing, and it ended up being an effective way in giving players a lot of power to create unique hybrid builds, which in turn gave the game a lot of replay value. It also relied heavily on another core of the roguelike, and that's the fact that the levels are randomly generated in every sense. The layout is random, the entrances and exits are random, room size, enemies within the room, you had shrines and interactables, chests and destructibles and their positions, enemy types, the affixes they have, the number of items they drop, the quality of items they drop. The goal was for the player to play a lifetime, yet still never experience the exact same run twice, and to remove the ability to have online guides that say, go to this area in this floor and kill this enemy to get this item. And just like any roguelike in this sense, it required adaptability. But at this point, as promising as this all seemed, there were some serious doubts. a long, detailed campaign, an intricate and in-depth character creation system, turn-based combat, Diablo had defied nearly every established staple of the RPG, putting it into an uncertain future. It had two possibilities. It could be a revolutionary hit, or it would quickly fade away into obscurity. However, as it neared its final stages, the team had begun to realize just what they had accomplished, as routine bug fixes would become out of hand and turn into actual full runs, as the developers themselves had difficulty turning away from their own game, often returning home late at night and telling their spouses, "Oh, sorry, honey. Yeah, long day at the office. It was brutal." In their minds, although I'm sure there were doubts, they'd created one of the most unique and addictive games of all time. The waters were tested briefly in a deal with PC Gamer magazine, which in their November 1996 issue, they offered a free demo of Diablo in their new DirectX API software, which served as a good form of last-minute feedback for bug fixes and some changes, such as adding the overlay map, as well as implementing a hotbar for item use, and also the ability to cast spells without having to open a menu. Pretty huge changes, all things considered, and it all came just 1 month out from release, as the team worked around the clock scrambling to release by Christmas. Unfortunately, they didn't make the Christmas deadline, as the game released just at the end of the year on December 31st. But as it would turn out, it didn't matter, as Diablo quickly smashed their initial prediction of 100,000 copies sold, as it soared to 500,000 by April, and then 1 million by November, making it the fastest-selling PC game at that point, and to this day, it remains to be one of the best-selling computer games of all time. It received accolade after accolade from every publication, as the gaming world quickly became lost in its addictive gameplay loop, item drops, and unique builds that the game had perfected. As described, the players were immediately thrown into the kingdom of Kendurus, specifically in the town of Tristram, where the townsfolk offer gossip and information of what's happening. There's been some strange occurrences at the town cathedral, where demons had begun pouring out of. The elder of the town, a man named Deckard Cain, serves as the player's advisor, guiding them along the campaign and, importantly, offering his identifying services. As was standard with games like Rogue, to learn the attributes and boons of a piece of equipment, you'd either need to identify it yourself via a consumable scroll that drops, or by enlisting the aid of an NPC for a small fee. Delving into the cathedral, the player experiences the meat of the game as they explore the previously mentioned randomly generated levels, fight randomized enemies with randomized affixes for randomized loot. Not counting side areas, there were 16 floors total, with 4 different levels split up into 4 parts: the cathedral, the catacombs, the caves, and finally, hell itself. Being the early years of the genre, there were just 7 pieces of equipment total. You had a weapon and an offhand, as well as body armor, a helmet, 2 rings, and an amulet, and they would hold various stat boosts like plus strength that increased melee damage, or dexterity, which was chance to hit armor and range damage, or magic, which increased your total mana pool, as well as allowing the player to learn higher level spells. And there are also more secondary stats, such as elemental resistances and armor class. Many items had stat requirements in order to equip them, and this is where the previously described multi-classing was alive and well. For example, when you think of a conventional sorcerer, you usually think of this lightly armored, robed wizard. However, if a player wanted to, in order to obtain a higher armor class and avoid physical attacks more effectively, they could put points into strength in order to equip this more heavily plated equipment, and in fact it was pretty beneficial to do so in Diablo 1. There were 3 different rarity of items. In order of least to most powerful, you had the normal whites, the magic blues, and unique yellows, the latter either being rewarded for completing quests or rarely dropping off of enemies. And in addition to powerful stats, they could also have these special unique affixes that altered gameplay in a major way, such as the Wind Force Bow, which knocked enemies back on hit, or maybe Leorg's Crown, which had lifesteal. And even today, the game remains to be quite effective in evoking excitement out of the player if they luck out and they receive this super powerful drop that completes their build. Whoa, resist all 50, 60% armor, minus 30 mana, but plus 15 to strength and vitality. Getting more into the story, the downfall of the town traces back to King Leoric, who was once this noble ruler who claimed the throne after driving out the tyrannical Zakharum, which was once a religion that worshipped the light, but was now corrupted and twisted to the forces of evil. Leoric made Tristram his capital, and he restored the cathedral that was built centuries earlier by the Horadrim, who were a group of wizards who forged items called soul stones, which imprisoned the prime evils of hell. As it turned out, beneath the cathedral was the soul stone containing Diablo, who was the Lord of Terror, and one day, one of Leoric's trusted advisors, the Archbishop Lazarus, uncovered the artifact during a forbidden excavation, and it wasn't long until whispers from the stone would seep into Lazarus' soul, making him a pawn of Diablo, with Leoric himself following soon after. The history of the town and the lore of the entire game would kind of be drip-fed to players through the form of these lore-related tomes placed randomly in the levels. It's revealed that these prime evils are the masters of hell. There's Mephisto, who's the Lord of Hatred, Baal, the Lord of Destruction, and of course Diablo, the Lord of Terror. Slowly, the player would uncover this dark reality of what was going on level by level, all the while battling Diablo's minions and lieutenants. One of the most memorable being the Butcher, who interestingly enough had a unique cutscene to introduce him, which was removed as it was a little too intense for audiences at the time. It turned out that Lazarus had lured people, including children, into the church with promises of games and toys, where they were subsequently slaughtered by the demon. So between the graphics and sound effects and music and lore, the whole tone of the game immediately stood out, and many even today reminisce of its uncanny ability to fully immerse the player and make them feel as if they were trudging through this actual dungeon. By this point, the player has certainly encountered some sort of quest, which were another randomly generated feature. There were 16 in total, with many of them, but not all, being randomly chosen, such as slaying the now undead Skeleton King Leoric, or perhaps retrieving a special anvil for the town blacksmith to craft a unique weapon. So combining this with the other many randomized elements of the game is quite effective in promoting additional playthroughs and once again banking on this replayability for its longevity. Eventually the player finds themselves in the catacombs on levels 5 through 8. As they delve deeper and gain new levels and equipment, the enemies of course get tougher to match them, whether that be raw strength and life, or having unique skill sets and mechanics that the player now has to dodge to handle. It's in these levels that we learn more of the tragedy of King Leoric. His younger son, Prince Albrecht, had gone missing, and stricken by grief, he became vulnerable to Diablo's influence. He began to go mad and executed innocent civilians, accusing them of treason, until his loyal knight, Lackdanon, slew him in self-defense. Wait, this sounds familiar.
Burn them all!
Leoric's dying curse animated his bones, and those of his knights as skeletal warriors, and the players would have a chance to encounter him through a quest where, if they defeat him, they're rewarded with his life-stealing crown. Next area were the caves, which were levels 9 through 12, which plunged you into this volcanic chasm rife with lava, as the setting of the game slowly became more and more demonic. And then lastly, the player ventures into hell itself on levels 13 through 16, into the heart of Diablo's forces. The enemies here are at their most powerful, of course, and they require a respectable amount of experience and know-how in order to defeat them. Good start. Owing to its pretty hardcore roots in Rogue, the game wasn't a cakewalk by any means, especially in the culture of the mid-90s where guides existed, but were much more sparse and less refined. And even then, that doesn't take into account the random nature of the game, which also hindered these step-by-step instructions to go here, get this item, as, of course, everybody's playthrough would be completely different. One huge difference, though, that made it far more beginner-friendly was the fact that it didn't have permanent character death, which, of course, is a staple of the rogue genre. The player could freely save, and if they were to die, you could just simply reload it and pick up where you left off, unless you accidentally save as you're dying. then you're screwed. Guess how I found that out?
Oh, I saved! Oh no. I can't do anything. That's it. That's game over.
But it's in these hell levels where you learn the grim truth. It was Lazarus who lured the king's son Albrecht away, and by plunging Diablo's soulstone into his forehead, reincarnated him as the Lord of Terror. You actually encounter Lazarus here, and if you manage to slay him, you open the gate to the final level where you face off against Diablo, who attacks with a flurry of flame magic and melee swings. It's quite the battle, and where 16 levels worth of stat leveling and gear choices are put to the test. But if you're successful, the Lord of Terror was slain. However, salvation soon turns to sacrifice. Without a host, Diablo's essence begins to writhe free, and it must find a new host lest its power and devastation be unleashed upon the world. And so the player dislodges the soulstone from its skull, revealing the body of the fallen prince, where he briefly orgasms, and then the player plunges it straight into their skull, hoping that they can contain the demon within, and bringing peace to the people of Sanctuary. A final narration is played, describing that the essence of Diablo is contained for now. The town of Tristram is saved, yet forever scarred, as you gaze eastwards to a land called Aranak, in a desperate search for answers on how to end the chain of torment for good. And so ends the story of a game that crafted a genre. It was hailed as a masterpiece shortly after its release, and the team wanted to immediately begin work on its sequel, Diablo 2. But its massive success actually ended up being a curse, as it caused pressure to instead focus on an expansion for Diablo 1. David, in particular, was very resistant to this idea, and they ended up reaching a compromise. The expansion would be developed by Synergistic Software, which was a division of Sierra Online, which was another developer under Davidson and Associates. But while they would develop the game, they would also be under the direction of Blizzard North to ensure that it was true to the base game and it followed the lore correctly. The expansion included new levels, items, monsters, a new class called the Monk, as well as some quality of life improvements such as a run mode, which increased movement speed in the town. However, unfortunately, the whole project ended up being quite controversial and frustrating, with Brevik citing frequent communication issues and Sierra failing to follow what North wanted of them. They would include quite silly quests and dialogue that contradicted the dark and serious tone of the base game.
If only I had something normal to wear, it wouldn't be so bad. Hey, could you go back to my place and get my suit for me?
They'd also made two more classes, the Bard and the Barbarian, that would contradict the lore of the in-development Diablo 2. And they were ordered to remove all of this from the game, which they did, but they still kept them accessible via a special command, which ended up putting a sour taste in Blizzard North's mouth, as they felt like they had sneaked it in under their noses. There were other issues, such as levels that had fixed layouts and weren't randomly generated, which kind of contradicted the entire idea of having a unique run every time. The aesthetic moved away from its signature gothic horror and more towards an H.P. Lovecraft-inspired version, among other issues, and today it's quite controversial among its player base, with some loving it and others disliking it, as it didn't feel close enough to the base game for them. Even today, David remains very unhappy with the expansion and how things went down behind the scenes.
What is the story with the Hellfire expansion?
Oh my God, really? You're gonna bring that up? I'll tell it quickly, but basically it was not made by us. We had a design doc. They didn't follow it. They made a teddy bear quest. I was fucking pissed, and it just didn't work out. We couldn't communicate well with them. I was really upset about the entire thing. And in the end, I just kind of have disavowed it. Now, whether or not that's the right thing to do or not, I don't know, but you know, I'm still a little upset about the entire way that it went down.
But what is objectively true is that Diablo today is one of the most legendary franchises of all time, and it played a very large role in making Blizzard so respected and revered at the time. So from a dusty computer lab, to an idea in a head, to words on paper, to a record-breaking PC game, it birthed a genre and influenced countless others. and players continue to enjoy it today, nearly 30 years later. It has an active and passionate speedrunning community that's dug deep into its code to unrandomize its random nature to reach new records of completion, as well as casual players just feeling nostalgic and loading it up every now and then to appreciate the series' beginnings. The market left on the video game industry and its individual players continues to resonate to this day, and that's why Diablo, released in 1996, was great. Thanks for watching my video. This series is a big passion project of mine, and I hope that came through. I love the Diablo series, and I'll definitely be covering Diablo 2 at some point, as well as a bunch of other games. And if you enjoyed this one, check the description for a playlist that includes all episodes of the series. And if you really enjoyed it, I did also play through the entire game with commentary and kind of edited it in the style of my OSR series, so if you enjoyed that, you might enjoy this as well. And that's available for channel members if you want a more casual look at what the game is. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode of Why It Was.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.